My name is Robert Scafe, and I'm a lecturer here in the expository writing program at OU. In this tutorial, I want to introduce you to the skills that you need to integrate quotations smoothly into your writing. Now, if you've started working with quotes from your primary sources already, you've probably discovered that using them can be trickier than it seems at first. It can be a challenge to separate the important parts from the words you don't need, for example, or to figure out how to blend another author's wording with your own. Now, these problems have solutions, and if you watch this video to the end, you'll be equipped with a set of tools that will give you the confidence to start blending quotations into your own writing. In particular, I'm going to touch on 1, introducing quotes. That is, what you should say to set up the quotation and how to smoothly connect your own words with the beginning of the quote. And 2, cutting and blending. How you can chop up quotations and weave them together with your own language. Let's begin by comparing a raw, undigested quotation with a well-integrated one, and then we'll discuss how you get from point A to point B. Now, this passage comes from an essay about American environmentalism and the national parks in the early 20th century. Take a second to read it, imagining what it would be like to encounter such a citation in a history essay. Environmentalists like John Muir claimed that business interests were intent on exploiting the newly founded national parks. Nevertheless, like everything else worthwhile, however sacred and precious and well-guarded, they've always been subject to attack, mostly by despoiling gain-seekers, mischief-makers of every degree from Satan to supervisors, lumbermen, cattlemen, farmers, etc., eagerly trying to make everything dollarable, often thinly disguised in smiling philanthropy. Other writers also emphasize the vulnerability of our natural sanctuaries. This is a classic example of a dangling quotation, or a quote that's simply been dropped into the middle of a text without any editing or blending. I think you can see how bringing a long quotation like this in from a completely different context creates confusion for the reader. Just to cite a few examples, the first word, nevertheless, signaled in Muir's original that he was complicating something that he just said. But in this new context, it creates confusion because the quote isn't intended to refute the sentence that preceded it, but to prove it. Similarly, the pronoun they in the quotation refers to something in the previous sentence. But since that's not included, we're left to guess. Is the phrase "they have always been subject to attack," is it talking about the environmentalists mentioned earlier, or is it talking about the national parks? Let's see how the author solved these problems, and some other ones, by chopping out the confusing bits and blending what remained with their own words. Environmentalists claimed that business interests were intent on exploiting the newly founded national parks. In his 1908 defense of Yosemite's Hetch Hetchy Valley, for example, Sierra Club founder John Muir explained that, however sacred and precious the national park seemed, despoiling gain-seekers, from Satan to supervisors, lumbermen, cattlemen, and farmers, would still try to exploit them under the pretense of smiling philanthropy. This depiction of the profiteers of nature as devious and even evil implied a relentless campaign that could only be stopped by vigorous government protection. This revision does 3 things right to help the reader assimilate the quote and to see how it supports the writer's argument. First, it begins by clearly indicating who's speaking and in what context. Second, it selects the most important bits from the original text, leaving aside distracting words and focusing the reader's attention on what matters most. And third, instead of simply moving on after the quote is finished, the revision helpfully explains to the reader what they're supposed to be getting out of Muir's words. In short, where the raw quotation may have left the reader disoriented, the blended quotation focuses their attention on how Muir's words prove the writer's point.